"Ma'am, step away from the register. This bill is fake." The words cut through the hum of chatter and music inside the bustling mall. The cashier, Heather Barnes, held Tanya Reed's $100 bill between two fingers as if it were something dirty. Her lips twisted into a smug half-smile, the kind that made everyone nearby turn and stare. Tanya blinked, startled. "I'm sorry?" she asked, confused. Heather's voice rose, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. "You heard me. This looks counterfeit. You're not walking out of here with these shoes." People began to whisper. A teenage boy snickered. Someone pulled out their phone. Tanya tried to keep her voice calm, her hand steady. "That's real money. I just got it from the pharmacy register." "Please," but Heather was already waving to mall security. "We've had scams all week. You people think you can play the system." The words hit harder than the accusation. Tanya's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Her son, Caleb, no older than 10, tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, forcing a small smile. "There's been a mistake. Mommy's going to fix it." Two security guards appeared. One of them, a stocky white man with mirrored sunglasses, stepped too close, his hand already hovering near his holster. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside," Tanya tried to explain. "Please, my son." He grabbed her wrist. The sneakers Caleb had picked out fell from her hands and thudded against the floor. The crowd's murmurs grew into a low roar. Phones were raised higher now, lenses capturing every second. "Sir, please," Tanya said, looking toward the security guard's partner. "You're making a mistake." But Heather just folded her arms, watching with satisfaction. "You should have thought about that before you tried to pay with fake cash." The guard twisted Tanya's arm behind her back. She winced, her breath catching, but she didn't scream. Caleb did. "Stop! You're hurting her!" He lunged forward, but another guard blocked him. "Please don't do this in front of my child," Tanya pleaded, her voice cracking but still dignified. And then, from behind the gathering crowd, a calm but commanding voice said, "That's enough." A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward. David Harrington. His tone carried quiet authority, the kind that made even the guards hesitate for a moment. "She's telling the truth. You're about to make a serious mistake." One of the officers turned toward him, unimpressed. "And who are you supposed to be?" David's eyes didn't flinch. "Someone who knows what real law enforcement looks like." The guard smirked. "Then you can explain that from the floor." Before David could reply, the officer shoved him backward. The crowd gasped. Another phone started recording. Within seconds, both Tanya and David were slammed to the ground, cuffed, and surrounded, their faces pressed against cold tile, their children watching in horror. The laughter that had filled the air moments ago was gone, replaced by uneasy silence and the sound of Caleb sobbing. They thought they were making an example of a single mother, the narrator's voice echoed, low and steady. In reality, they were about to expose a machine built to profit from humiliation. Tanya Reed's life had never been easy, but she had never let the world see her break. A decade earlier, she was a young paralegal student with a future mapped out in careful detail. Law school, a small firm, maybe her own practice one day. Then came the knock on the door. Two soldiers in dress uniforms. Two words that shattered everything. "We're sorry." Her husband, Private First Class Marcus Reed, had been killed by an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan, just 3 weeks before coming home. In a single afternoon, Tanya went from wife to widow, from student to single mother. Her dreams paused the moment she saw baby Caleb sleeping in his crib, clutching a stuffed bear his father had sent from overseas. She promised him that night, through quiet tears, that she would never let him see the world as cruel as she had. Bills stacked up quickly, and the degree that once seemed a short walk away now looked like a mountain. Tanya dropped out of school and took the first job she could find, cashier at a corner pharmacy. Later, she trained as a pharmacy technician, earning slightly better pay, but it was still never enough. She'd leave home before sunrise, drop Caleb at a neighbor's, and work double shifts surrounded by the chemical scent of sanitizer and pills, then head straight to night classes 2 evenings a week to finish what she started. She used to tell her mother over the phone, "I'm doing my best." Her mother would answer the same way every time, "Baby, dignity is the one thing they can't take unless you hand it over." Those words became her armor. Whispered prayers on the bus ride home, a mantra she repeated each time she faced another disrespectful customer, another bill, another reminder that life had stolen her partner but not her pride. She didn't complain, didn't snap back, didn't fight the small injustices, because she was saving her strength for the big ones. Across town, another single parent carried a different kind of burden. David Harrington, the director of Homeland Security, was known for his calm authority and unshakable ethics. But those who knew him personally saw the cracks, the fatigue in his eyes, the weight in his voice. 3 years earlier, his wife, Sarah, had died of breast cancer. Since then, David had buried himself in work, overseeing reforms that aimed to root out bias and profiling across federal law enforcement agencies. It was personal to him. He'd seen too many reports of innocent people being stopped, searched, and humiliated because they fit a description. But Washington had a way of suffocating reform. Each new proposal he pushed ran into a wall of bureaucracy, politics, and hidden interests. Every time he thought he was making progress, another incident somewhere in the country reminded him how little had changed. So when Malik, his 12-year-old son, begged him to take a weekend off to go shopping, David finally agreed. "Just one day," he said. "No meetings, no phone calls. Just you and me." He didn't know that the very system he was fighting in boardrooms and committees would reveal itself to him in the rawest, ugliest way that afternoon, in front of his child, and in the eyes of a stranger named Tanya Reid. The city's police department, led by Chief Rick Donovan, had long been hailed as a model of efficiency. Crime rates were down, arrests were up, and the department proudly displayed awards for community vigilance. But behind those numbers was a darker truth, one known only to a few inside the force. Donovan had turned policing into business. He had cut a deal with Sentinel Holdings, a powerful private prison contractor that paid bonuses for every counterfeit cash or fraudulent ID arrest made within city limits. It didn't matter if the suspects were innocent. What mattered were the numbers. The arrests justified contracts, the contracts justified budgets, and the money flowed upward, through shell accounts, campaign donations, and union bonuses. Every month, Donovan held closed-door meetings with his senior officers, urging them to keep the arrests rolling. Those who met quotas received perks, vacations, gift cards, discretionary pay. Those who didn't were quietly transferred or demoted. And at the bottom of that chain were people like Heather Barnes, cashiers, security guards, and small-time workers incentivized to spot counterfeit behavior. She didn't know or care about the full machine she was part of. All she saw was the extra $200 bonus for vigilance. Heather's store had a reputation for catching counterfeit cases, and the mall's management rewarded her for it. The truth was, the more fake cash she reported, the more publicity the mall received for being security conscious. It was the perfect setup, one that preyed on ignorance, bias, and fear. That's how Tanya became a target, not for breaking a law, but for fitting a profitable pattern. And that's why, when David stepped forward to defend her, Chief Donovan's system reacted the way it always did, with aggression first, reason later. To Donovan's officers, Tanya was another statistic. To Heather, another bonus. To the mall, another PR win. But to David Harrington, watching it unfold from the crowd, it was a mirror, reflecting everything he'd spent his life trying to fight. He saw it not as a coincidence, but as proof that the rot he'd been battling wasn't buried in policy papers. It was alive and breathing, right here in front of his son. And while Tanya stood trembling, trying to protect her dignity, David realized this was no longer about one woman and her child. It was about a system that believed humiliation could be monetized. Tanya didn't know it yet, but her humiliation was about to meet its reckoning in a man who had made a career out of hunting down corruption. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed faintly, casting everything in a harsh, colorless glow. The air smelled of stale coffee and sweat. Tanya sat in a hard metal chair, her wrists cuffed to the table. Her palms were raw from the tiles of the mall floor, but her eyes burned hotter than the sting of her bruises. Across from her, a cop lazily flipped through paperwork, chewing gum, occasionally smirking at her as if she were already convicted. Down the hallway, through a narrow window, she could see Caleb. Her little boy sat next to another child, a boy about 12, with wide, frightened eyes, Malik Harrington. Both children huddled on a wooden bench, tears streaking their faces. A vending machine hummed beside them, ignored. Caleb clutched his mother's scarf in his hands, as if holding onto it could somehow bring her back. One officer leaned toward another and snickered. Another welfare case trying to pass counterfeit. They're everywhere now. The words cut Tanya like glass. She kept her head down, but her fingers trembled against the cuffs. In another room, David Harrington sat in silence, cuffs digging into his wrists. His suit jacket had been stripped off. His tie lay crumpled on the floor. A young officer stood by the door, tapping on his phone, muttering, "Never seen a fake ID this good." David spoke evenly. "It's not fake. Call the Federal Liaison's office. Ask for the Director of Homeland Security." The officer laughed. "Sure, and I'm the president." Minutes later, Chief Rick Donovan walked in. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who carried himself like every rule bent in his favor. He held David's wallet between two fingers. "Homeland Security, huh? Big claim for a guy caught up in a counterfeit bust." David met his gaze without flinching. "You're making a serious mistake." Donovan smirked. "We'll see about that. I've dealt with your type before. All titles and arrogance. Around here, you're just another perp until I say otherwise." He tossed the ID onto the table. "Run it. Verify it. I want to see how long this fairy tale lasts." Outside the interrogation room, Tanya's situation wasn't faring better. Assistant District Attorney Kendra Lewis, all sharp heels and sharper tone, strode in holding a thin file. She sat across from Tanya and began flipping through papers. "Ms. Reed," she said without looking up, "you've got a kid. I'm sure you don't want to drag him through months of court hearings. So here's what we're offering. Admit the bill was counterfeit, sign the statement, and you'll walk out of here tonight." Tanya blinked, but it wasn't fake. Kendra sighed, tapping her pen. "That's what everyone says. Look, you plead guilty to possession of forged currency. It stays off your record in a year. Easy, you'll be home by bedtime." Tanya's voice trembled, but not with fear, with fury. "You want me to lie so you can file your paperwork faster?" Kendra looked up, unimpressed. "You want to make this harder on yourself? Suit yourself." She gathered the papers, stood, and added under her breath, "People like you always think you're special." Meanwhile, in Donovan's office, the phone rang. His aide picked it up, listened for a few seconds, then froze. "Chief," he whispered, "it's the Department of Homeland Security. They're confirming his credentials. He's really the director." For the first time, Donovan's smirk faltered, but instead of admitting his mistake, he doubled down. "Keep him here," he ordered. "Tell them we're verifying through local channels. We're not done." When word reached David, he didn't look surprised, just disappointed. "I've seen corruption in other countries," he said quietly. "Didn't think I'd find it this close to home." Hours passed. It was well past midnight when Tanya and David were finally released under federal order. No apology, no explanation. Just the metallic clink of cuffs being removed and a curt, "You're free to go." Outside, under the flickering glow of the precinct's streetlight, Tanya stepped into the cool night air. Caleb ran into her arms, crying into her coat. A few feet away, Malik hugged his father tightly, refusing to let go. Tanya looked up to see David watching her. Their eyes met, exhaustion and anger colliding in a moment of silent understanding. He extended a hand. "David Harrington." She hesitated, then took it. "Tanya Reed." Their handshake was steady, firm, steel meeting fire. From behind them, a voice called out, "Ms. Reed, Mr. Harrington." A woman jogged up, press badge swinging from her neck, camera bag slung over her shoulder. "Nia Reynolds, independent journalist. I've been following cases like yours for 6 months. What just happened in there isn't an accident." Tanya frowned. "What do you mean?" Nia opened her tablet and swiped through photos and charts. Names, arrest records, mugshots. "You're not the first. There have been dozens of arrests across the state. Always the same story. A suspicious $100 bill, no counterfeit proof, no charges filed, just humiliation and release. It's not random. It's systemic. David stepped closer. You have documentation? All of it, she said. Police reports, transaction logs, even internal memos from Sentinel Holdings. They pay kickbacks for every counterfeit arrest that leads to detainment. Tanya's stomach turned. Kickbacks? For innocent people? Nia nodded grimly. It's a business. The private prisons profit from intake numbers. The police get bonuses. The DA's office keeps their conviction stats high. Everyone wins, except the victims. David exchanged a look with Tanya. The anger in his eyes was cold, calculating. The look of a man who had spent years dismantling systems just like this one. He said softly, "You think this was a mistake?" Nia's reply was razor sharp. "No, Mr. Harrington. It's a business model." The streetlight flickered again, buzzing like a warning. Tanya pulled Caleb close. Malik looked up at his father, whispering, "Are they going to get away with it?" David looked out at the horizon, the city's skyline gleaming under the weight of its own corruption. "Not for long," he said quietly. And with that, under the echo of sirens in the distance and the flash of a reporter's camera, the unlikely alliance between a single mother and a federal director was born, forged not in strategy, but in shared humiliation. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the night the system that fed on people like Tanya Reid had just signed its own death warrant. The storm that followed their release wasn't loud at first. It was quiet, methodical, and deliberate. David Harrington knew better than to make noise too soon. He'd seen too many investigations collapse under political pressure, so he built his case from the shadows. Using his authority at Homeland Security, he quietly formed a covert team of trusted agents, people who owed no allegiance to the city or its corrupt institutions. He called the operation Integrity Dawn. Its mission: expose the network of profit-driven arrests tied to Sentinel Holdings. NIA Reynolds joined the operation as the civilian investigator. Her investigative instincts and deep archive of leaked documents became the backbone of the evidence chain. "You can't fight them with outrage," she told David. "You have to fight them with proof they can't bury." For weeks they worked out of an unlisted safe house on the outskirts of town, an old farmhouse converted into a secure command post. Tanya and Caleb stayed there too, protected under federal witness protocols. Tanya helped catalog evidence, matching names of victims with timestamps and case numbers. Every name represented another innocent life ground up in the machine. It was Nia who uncovered the smoking gun, a spreadsheet linking Sentinel Holdings' quarterly public safety grants to the city's police union fund. Each counterfeit cash arrest corresponded with a $100 to $200 deposit from Sentinel. "It's all here," Nia said, scrolling through rows of data. They turned human humiliation into a profit model, but it wasn't enough to expose the money. They needed to expose the culture that sustained it. One night, David's tech team managed to recover fragments of deleted body cam footage from the precinct's servers. The audio was scratchy, distorted, but clear enough to recognize the voice. "Keep the arrests rolling," Chief Donovan barked in the clip. "They feed the system. You stop now, and Sentinel stops paying. You want those bonuses? Don't get soft." The room fell silent as a line echoed through the speakers. Tanya's hands clenched into fists. "He called people like me the system's fuel," she said quietly. David nodded grimly. "Then we burn their system to the ground." But before they could move, the system struck back. It happened just past midnight. A sudden crash shattered the farmhouse's front window. Flashbangs exploded in the living room, flooding it with blinding white light. Caleb screamed. Masked men in tactical gear stormed inside, shouting, "Federal raid! Everyone down!" David instantly knew it wasn't real. The uniforms were wrong. No agency insignia, no call signs. These weren't federal agents. They were mercenaries disguised as SWAT, sent by Donovan's loyalists. "Get to the back," David shouted. He pulled Tanya behind the kitchen counter, shielding her as bullets tore through the drywall. Caleb bolted. Toward the rear door, guided by Malik, who had grabbed his phone and started recording. "Keep the camera steady," David yelled. Malik nodded, ducking low as he filmed the masked attackers shouting threats. "Drop the case, Harrington," one of them roared. "Walk away, or we'll bury every witness." "Not tonight," David growled. Within minutes, the true Homeland Security backup arrived. Real agents, armed and relentless. The imposters fled into the dark, leaving chaos behind. Glass shattered, walls riddled with holes, smoke curling through the air. When the dust cleared, Tanya sat trembling on the floor, Caleb clinging to her arm. David knelt beside them, checking for injuries. Malik's hands still shook as he held his phone. "I got everything," he whispered. "The whole thing." The video uploaded automatically to the cloud and hit social media before dawn. By morning, it had gone viral. 30 million views in 12 hours. The footage showed masked men storming a federal safe house, shouting orders that implicated the local police. Public outrage erupted. Protesters flooded City Hall. Civil rights groups demanded justice. Under mounting pressure, Congress called an emergency hearing. The chamber was packed. Cameras lined every wall, reporters jostling for space. David walked in wearing his gray suit, the same one he'd been arrested in. His face was calm, his eyes steady. Tanya sat behind him with Caleb and Malik, her hand gripping Nia's. The air was electric with tension. When the chairwoman gave him the floor, David began simply. This started with a $100 bill. He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with charts, bank statements, and emails connecting Sentinel Holdings to the city's police union fund. Sentinel paid over $7 million in the past 2 years for what they called community enforcement incentives, he said. In plain English, kickbacks for false arrests. Every time someone like Tanya Reid was handcuffed for spending honest money, someone else got paid. Gasps rippled through the room. Then came the next exhibit, the body cam audio. Chief Donovan's voice filled the speakers again. "Keep the arrests rolling. They feed the system." The silence afterward was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Heather Barnes was called to testify under subpoena. The woman who once smirked at Tanya across a cash register now sat shaking, tears glistening in her eyes. "They told us to flag cash from the wrong color hands," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't understand what I was part of. They called it preventive vigilance. I called it my job." A reporter whispered, "Oh my God," as Heather broke down on the stand. David rose from his seat, his tone controlled but cutting. "You called her a criminal for spending honest money," he said, voice rising with conviction. "Turns out the real counterfeit was your justice." The room erupted, reporters clapping, spectators standing, the crowd cheering through tears. The chairwoman slammed her gavel, but even she couldn't hide the faint smile tugging at her lips. Within 24 hours, federal raids swept the city. Donovan was arrested on live television, dragged from his office in handcuffs. His face, once smug with authority, now pale and stunned under the camera lights. Assistant DA Kendra Lewis resigned before dawn, her name trending nationwide beside headlines that read, "Justice Reversed." Sentinel Holdings' assets were frozen, and their executives taken into custody. Outside, the same crowd that once laughed at Tanya in the mall now filled the streets with cheers. Strangers held signs that read, "Respect isn't a luxury," and "Justice, not quotas." Tanya stood beside David on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing around them. Caleb tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, people are cheering for us." She smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "No, baby," she said. "They're cheering for the truth." And for the first time, the city listened. The fallout hit like an earthquake. Within days of the hearings, lawsuits rained down on every level of the city's power structure. The mall that had once humiliated Tanya became ground zero for national outrage. Protesters filled the parking lot with handmade signs that read, "Shopping while black is not a crime," and "Accountability has a receipt." Within a week, the mall's corporate owners terminated every private security contract and issued a public apology, calling Tanya Reid a symbol of integrity and courage. The police department wasn't as lucky. The Justice Department launched a full-scale investigation into their practices. Officers who had once mocked Tanya were now being questioned under oath. Dozens of disciplinary files surfaced showing years of quietly buried misconduct. The department's suspicious cash initiative was dismantled and its funding revoked. Chief Donovan's name was struck from every plaque, every commendation. His career ended not with a retirement ceremony but with a mugshot. Sentinel Holdings collapsed almost overnight. Their stock plummeted as the government terminated all contracts tied to law enforcement performance incentives. Former executives fled the country or cooperated with investigators to avoid federal prison. The public didn't just turn on them. They demanded reform. For the first time in years, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agreed on something. The system had gone too far. In the midst of the chaos, David Harrington became an unlikely national hero. He hadn't asked for attention, but it found him anyway. Every news outlet wanted an interview. Every network wanted him on air. He was hailed as the whistleblower who dismantled one of the largest corruption rings in modern law enforcement. When asked why he risked everything, he simply said, "Because power means nothing if you can't use it to protect the powerless." But the heart of the story, the soul that moved millions, was Tanya Reid. After the hearings, David personally recommended her for a position on the newly formed Federal Civil Rights Task Force, a group dedicated to reviewing police community relations nationwide. When the official announcement came, reporters crowded her front lawn. Tanya, standing at her doorstep in the same navy blazer she'd worn to her husband's funeral years earlier, faced the cameras with tears in her eyes. "I didn't need revenge," she said, her voice trembling. "I needed change. And for once, I think we're seeing it." She paused, glancing down at Caleb, who held her hand tightly. "I just want a world where my son doesn't have to grow up proving he's innocent before he's even accused." The moment went viral. People called it the speech that healed the country, and for a while, it truly felt that way. Later that evening, when Tanya came home from her first day at the task force, she found a folded sheet of paper waiting on her desk. It was a drawing by Caleb, the same mall drawn in crayon. Only this time there were no guards, no cuffs, no shouting, just families shopping, laughing, and smiling. "I fixed it," he said proudly. "Now everyone's happy." Tanya hugged him tight, tears spilling onto his hair. "You did, baby. You really did." She framed the drawing the next morning and hung it in her new office. It became the symbol of everything she fought for, a world that finally looked like justice. Meanwhile, Chief Rick Donovan faced the ultimate reckoning. His lawyers tried to negotiate, but the evidence was too overwhelming. In a tense courtroom filled with reporters, he finally pleaded guilty to racketeering, fraud, and civil rights violations. The crowd erupted in applause when the judge read the sentence: 20 years in federal prison. But the most emotional moment came when Heather Barnes, the cashier whose accusation had started it all, took the stand. Her hand shook as she faced Tanya from across the room. "I can't undo what I did," she said through tears, her voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting my store. I didn't realize I was destroying someone's dignity. I'm so sorry." Tanya didn't look away. She simply nodded, calm and composed. "You can't change the past," she said softly, "but you can help fix the future." Heather broke down sobbing. The judge called for order, but the courtroom stayed silent, every eye on the woman who had turned her own pain into purpose. As Tanya stepped out of the courthouse that afternoon, reporters surrounded her again. But this time, the flashes didn't feel invasive. They felt like closure. She looked up at the sunlight breaking through the clouds, smiled faintly, and whispered to herself, "We're finally free." It wasn't revenge. It was redemption, and the beginning of a new kind of justice. Months later, the storm had settled into something lasting: change. Out of the chaos and courtroom battles, Tanya Reid and David Harrington co-founded Project Integrity, a national initiative devoted to training retailers and law enforcement to recognize bias and abolish profit-driven arrests. What began as one woman's humiliation had become a movement reshaping the country's understanding of justice. Their message was simple: fairness isn't optional. Under Project Integrity, thousands of cashiers, store managers, and police officers attended workshops that rewrote outdated suspicion policies. Major retail chains partnered with the program, introducing new ethical standards that prioritized respect over quotas. Tanya often led the sessions herself, her quiet strength transforming rooms full of hardened professionals. "Dignity," she would say, "should never depend on who's holding the cash." David took the mission to Washington. Together, they helped draft a congressional bill on ethical policing and consumer equality, later nicknamed the Reed-Harrington Act. The bill mandated transparency in retail arrests, banned quota incentives, and required implicit bias training nationwide. When it passed, bipartisan applause filled the chamber, a rare moment of unity born from tragedy. The world didn't just notice, it documented. Netflix released a 4-part docuseries titled The Real Counterfeit, the Tanya Reid story. It opened with the mall footage that started it all and ended with Tanya's speech on reform. The series broke streaming records, sparking discussions in classrooms and city councils across America. Meanwhile, justice rippled outward. Former police chief Rick Donovan served time in federal prison, his mugshot going viral under the biting hashtag #IN. The Real Counterfeit. The image became a symbol of accountability, proof that power could fall too. Nia Reynolds, the fearless journalist who had connected every thread, received a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative work, dedicating it to every voice the system tried to silence. And Heather Barnes, the cashier whose accusation began it all, launched a nonprofit called Receipts of Reform, teaching retail workers how to recognize prejudice before it becomes policy. The final public chapter came one quiet afternoon. Tanya and David returned to the same mall, their sons walking beside them. The air felt lighter now, warmer. When they reached the store, Tanya laid a crisp $100 bill on the counter. The new cashier glanced at it, smiled, and said, "Welcome back, ma'am." For the first time, Tanya didn't feel watched. She felt seen. They mocked a mother for daring to buy shoes for her child, forgetting that justice never stays silent forever. What began as a moment of humiliation inside a crowded mall became the spark that tore down an empire built on greed and deceit. One cashier's arrogance, one chief's corruption, one innocent woman's pain, all collided to expose a machine that thrived on bias and fear. But justice, even delayed, always finds its voice. Tanya Reid's quiet courage didn't just clear her name. It forced a nation to look in the mirror and ask what kind of people it wanted to be. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't anger, it's accountability. True power isn't in the hand that cuffs the innocent, but in the voice that refuses to be silenced. When dignity meets truth, even power has to bow. Tanya didn't just win her freedom, she redefined what it means to fight with grace, and reminded the world that justice can start with one small act of defiance. If you believe no parent should ever be treated like a criminal for loving their child, share this story right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story proves why justice is never a mistake.